Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dave Peterson. I'm here with the Practicing Magic chat, and today we've got Scott Stenwick with us. And I'm very excited about this. I've known Scott for several years. I think we met in 2017. And Scott is a longtime practitioner of Enochian magic for ongoing 30 years now. He has a background in ceremonial magic in a number of other ways. Currently practicing a lot of thelemic magic, and Scott is the local body master of the OTO lodge here in Minneapolis. And so I'm really excited to welcome Scott to our chat. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Dave, good to see you.
Great to see you too. How's it going today?
It's going all right. All things considered, technical difficulties and whatnot. But other than that, things are going fine.
That's right. I think most of the people who join us today will join through a recording later on. And we had a number of difficulties both with the Facebook chat and then getting things up and running on Zoom. So thanks for being so patient with that, Scott. And I hope everyone is going to enjoy this recording after the fact. So Scott, I'm just going to kind of dive in to some general questions. I know that you had a background in magic before you started practicing Enochian magic, and even with what you're doing in Thelema these days. Did that involve ceremonial magic, and what was that like?
Well, so I've been doing some sort of ceremonial magic, with greater and lesser degrees of skill, going quite a ways back. I mean, I was doing some of this stuff in high school, like I did some stuff out of the Key of Solomon and stuff like that when I was, and it's like, I'm 51, so it's like, well, how many years ago was that? So quite some time. And so I actually come from a family that had magical practitioners, not in the OTO, but another group called the Brotherhood of Light, which is Albert Benjamin's group, not the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light or the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. Those are different groups. This was the Brotherhood of Light, founded by Albert Benjamin in, I think, the 1930s, I think it was. And my great-grandmother was a member of that group, and in Red Wing, Minnesota, and she was a medium and she was an astrologer. She would do charts and seances and this kind of stuff. And she was also involved in this system of ceremonial magic. And so I grew up with having her reference books around and stuff like that. And I think one of the advantages of coming from that background, even though my parents didn't practice and I never actually met her, she died before I was born. But one of the things that I do have in my background is I never grew up in a family where, oh, magic is this horrible, evil thing that you can't do and stuff like that. So, my parents, for all the, for all their foibles, that was not one of them. I mean, me being interested in magic and psychic stuff and all that sort of thing was not really something that was prohibited. They're just like, well, you just got to be careful doing that stuff, whatever was kind of their attitude. And so as I got older and met other practitioners, I think I realized that background was kind of different than what a lot of people came from. I mean, just in the sense of, I meet so many people who come to occultism, who, had like fundamentalist relatives or grew up with fundamentalist parents and stuff like that, who were more like, oh, magic is this like evil prohibited thing. And it's like, so that's kind of interesting. It's like most of the negative stuff about magic I got was, just kind of in the general culture. I was in high school, in the 1980s. And, there was all the, they had stuff like, oh, the evils of the Simon Necronomicon and all this stuff in popular culture, like about Dungeons and Dragons and all this stuff, right? Where, oh, this is like all like real occultism and it's evil. So, I mean, that's really where I got the negative messages that I saw about magic. And of
Mhm.
course, that was ridiculous.
Mhm.
One of the things that I will relate, and I think I've talked about this in some of my videos, but so I was really into Dungeons and Dragons when I was in high school, and
Mhm.
actually no real relation between that and doing magical occult stuff. The magical occult stuff in my family was before I ever discovered that. But anyway, so I was a big RPG gamer, and so it was so I subscribed to Dragon Magazine, which was the TSR Games Dungeons and Dragons magazine that they put out.
Right,
And
right.
so there was this fundamentalist group. They're saying dungeons suicides among Dungeons and Dragons are like this many, right? And so they had these numbers that and they sounded like big, right? However
Mhm.
many, 100,000s or whatnot of suicides or something like that. But so one of the readers of Dragon Magazine said, well, you kind of got to understand the math. Let's take a look at this. And so this person, and I don't remember if it was a he or a she, but this person, they broke it down. And they said, all right, well, so we know that there's about this many people who play Dungeons and Dragons in the population, okay? And this group is saying there are X number of suicides associated with Dungeons and Dragons. And so
Uh-huh.
they said, all right, so if we take their number and we divide it into the number of gamers that we know from market research, you actually get a suicide rate that's half that of the general population. So is it good? Okay, people need to understand the math. And every time somebody
Sure.
comes up with this, oh, it's just like satanic conspiracy or something. Okay, you have to know how many Satanists there actually are. Okay, and the fact is there aren't that many occultists, and like Satanists are a subset of that. I mean, even if you say left-hand path in general, okay, that's bigger
Yeah.
than, yeah. So anyway,
And the
I just like,
difference, yeah, right. Big difference between people who are like devil worshippers who want to, I've had it defined as want to oppose everything, as opposed to Satanists who just do their thing, right?
well, yeah, and I mean it's like the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan. They're both actually atheistic organizations, so they don't
Right.
worship the devil. And so that's where like almost all the numbers are coming from, because like TST is pretty big. I think
Yeah.
at one point they said they had like 50,000 members or something like that. And it's like that's larger than any occult group, period. So
Right. And
anyway,
apologies to all righteous devil worshippers and Satanists out there. We're all friends. Scott, this is so fascinating. So
okay, well, but let me get back to
oh,
the question though.
okay,
Okay,
sure.
so I
Yeah.
was just that was kind of an aside. I got
Right,
the
which is
cameras on and
great.
I go. But anyway, so what I grew up with, doing high school, I read some of the stuff from the Brotherhood of Light,
Uh-huh.
and I looked at a little bit of that stuff. And what I looked for other sources on Magic, and what I wound up finding was getting into was like Crowley and Golden Dawn kind of stuff. And
Uh-huh.
so it's in a way it's kind of a bummer, because the Brotherhood of Light system is completely different than Crowley's Thelemic system. Like for example, the attributions of the tarot, theirs are based on Levy, not on the Golden Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go through their tarot deck, it's like, so it's the Levy arrangement, and that skews everything because the attributions are all different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wound up learning the Crowley Golden Dawn kind of arrangement earlier on before I ever really got into the Brotherhood of Light stuff. So even though I'm kind of a quote unquote generational in that system, it's not actually the system that I use.
Mm-hmm.
It's a similar system in the sense that, I mean, it's based on the tarot, it's based on astrology. There are various magical teachings, but as it wound up, I kind of went in this kind of hermetic direction, and then hermetic into Golden Dawn, and then Golden Dawn into Thelema eventually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And actually,
Which
I was
is a
doing it.
very well-trodden path. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and actually, I was doing Enochian before I got into Thelema. So I started
Ah.
off doing it more as like more just from like a general hermetic kind of perspective,
Huh.
and then I got more into Thelema, and I realized, oh, well, so Thelema is actually just kind of like universalist hermeticism, and if you think about it that way, then you can get rid of some of the trappings of, that falls in line with, some of the different stuff with organized religion. I mean, there's a lot of, some of the negative baggage of Christianity comes into Hermeticism, depending on who you talk to and look at. I mean, there are people like the Martinists, who are not, and that's completely fine if somebody's a Martinist, but Martinism, for example, is an example. It's a Hermetic system, and there's a lot of the stuff from Christianity, like the "thou shalt nots" and stuff like that, kind of winds up making it into that system. And again, if that's somebody's listening to this, that's a system they like. Okay, that's fine. I think people can practice their spirituality however they want. But for me, the "thou shalt nots" that never really resonated with me, and I suppose it was only natural or eventual that I would find my way into do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law kind of thing.
That seems to be a natural progression, and you and I have similar backgrounds, and some are very different. Like when you talk about your family background, it's fascinating, and I was going to ask you if you felt a kind of calling for doing magic, and it seems like it presented itself to you in your family. And I'm one of those people who was brought up agnostic, right? We had nothing, right? I got introduced to things, stumbling onto them and noticing my senses, and then discovering bookstores. So this is a great story. So, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think, I don't know that I can point to like one event or something that was like a calling to me. It's something, as long as I can remember, I've always been interested in it. Like, like the powers of the mind, and, what you can do with consciousness and things like that. I think it's just kind of like a basic part of my personality. I mean, and I don't know if there's anything to this, but so my great grandmother died a year and a half before I was born, and my parents are like, "Oh, you remind us of her so much." I don't know, maybe I reincarnated or something. I have no idea. I never met her, so I could, so obviously we weren't around at the same time. I was her first descendant born after she died. I don't know if that's significant. There's some folklore, I think, in some forms, some versions of witchcraft that say, oh, people in families reincarnate. I don't know if that's true. I've never had, like a full-on kind of like memory that like a reincarnation kind of memory or flashback or anything like that. But it is interesting just from a familial sense. It's like, okay, so she was kind of the occultist in the family, and then like, okay, I came along, and just from the time I was very young, I was just always interested in it. And
I often wonder if it has to do with, we're learning things all the time, and when I started studying anthropology, no one thought there was really any strict inheritance of culture at all. Like it was completely separate from physical experience. And now we know about epigenetic inheritance, like there are inclinations that you can inherit. So who knows? I saw this come up in a conversation recently.
Yeah, it's like, from what I've seen, it looks like it has to do with different traits getting activated during periods of stress, and then those traits get passed along. So it may not necessarily be culture, but you could have a group of people that, based on stresses that happen on specific intervals, they can kind of be like attuned to like the pattern of stressors in a given environment. And people will slowly adapt to that along epigenetic lines. So so
absolutely.
Experiences that like your grandparents had could still be reflected in your own genetics.
Yeah, they can. Hey, so you had this broad exposure to magic, right? And inclinations back to your early days. What if I narrowed that down and asked you what kind of led you to Enochian?
Okay, well, so when I was in college, I was in this program at St. Olaf called the Para College, where you could do tutorials with specific professors and stuff like that. So this was great. It was like you do this individual education thing. It's kind of like the thing that Isaac Bonowitz did out at that university. I am the only person with a degree in magic. It's like, if I had done my para-college degree in magic, which I didn't, I'd be like, you are not the only person. But anyway, so I was interested in Hermeticism. And So I did a tutorial with one of the history professors there, who had a background in like the Renaissance and like witch hunting, and then some of the religious movements from the Renaissance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so we did this tutorial, and with that I was exposed, we looked at, Agrippa D and Bruno, who were like the big Renaissance magicians. And I was absolutely fascinated by D's story. Hey, he chronicled, all this stuff. And so I've been into computers too since I was a kid. And what really impressed me about looking at D and looking at Enochian is, hey, here's like a system of grimoire magic that we basically got the source code for. Okay. So it's like, we don't have that anywhere else. I mean, I'm willing to bet that, most of the magicians who put together the grimoires, spirits and stuff, they did something like what Dee and Kelly did. They somehow got in contact with these spirits and got a bunch of information. But we don't have diaries chronicling any of that. With Enochian, we can go back and we can say, oh, look, okay, so this comes from here, this comes from here, this spirit said this. And, we've got this whole 7-year chronicle of Dee and Kelly receiving the system. And so if you're looking at it from the standpoint of, you want to build a magical system, like debug a magical system, just like you would a computer program. Okay, this information is just absolutely invaluable. Okay, and so I did that. So I got out of college and I got more into Enochian. I got the diaries. One of my jobs when I was right out of college, I was a security guard for a while. And I find a number of people who are into Enochian have worked as or work as security guards. And the reason is, when you're a security guard, you can read. And you can sit there, and if nothing is happening, you have nothing to do but read. So you're like, oh, now I'll read these 7 years worth of diaries while I'm sitting here. And you get time to do that. I find, oh, hey, that's an interesting thing. But so that was how I got through the diaries the first time, as I read through them, right after college, when I was working as a security guard. And from there, I got different books. I got a hold of the Schuler books, which the Schuler books are kind of so-so. And some people say they're just horrible. Like the first two are not horrible. The first one is actually, if you want to do Golden Dawn, Enochian magic, and you want a fairly simple guide to it, which granted is kind of incomplete. In the first book, there's stuff like, they don't include like some of the information about the calls, like if you want to actually do it in the angelic, and there's some other stuff that's simplified in their book, in the first book. But the first book isn't a terrible overview to specifically like Golden Dawn, Thelemic style Enochian, which I actually kind of drifted away from pretty quickly. I'd already drifted away from it by the time I joined OTL. But and then their second book, Advanced Enochian Magic, is like so much. It's basically summarizing the vision and the voice. So it's like, if you read through this, it's like, oh, it's just all, so Crowley saw this, and we have this theosophical model that we think he was looking at. It's pretty much what the book is. And it's like, it does include, more stuff so you can do the calls and that. So I mean, they're not terrible. I think some of their later books are just kind of ridiculous. Like Enochian Physics has the best blurb of any occult book I have ever read. And it's simultaneously one of the worst occult books I've ever read. It's like, so it says, this is the physics of the magical universe. And I'm like, wow, right? I'm opening this up. And it's like, this is a high school physics principle. This does not conflict with our monad model of the Enochian universe. Here's another high school physics principle. This does not conflict. I'm like, man, after that blurb. It's
how
terrible.
Disappointing.
Yeah, it was very, very disappointing. But so anyway, so I moved kind of out of that because I'm like, well, so much of this stuff contradicts the diaries, because I read the diaries first. And so what I found and worked with for a long time was Jeffrey James' Enochian Evocation, which is more based on, it's more, stuff pulled out of like Sloan 3191. And I mean, James isn't perfect. There's some stuff in there that if you look in the diaries isn't necessarily right, but it's much, much closer than what the Golden Dawn did and what Crowley picked up for Enochian.
That's a really interesting question. Why do you think they veered off so much from D?
Oh, it's because they wanted to take their version of 19th century Hermetic Kabbalah and
Mhm.
slap it together with Enochian. That's what they were doing.
They wanted correspondences for everything.
Right. And well, and more to the point, they looked at the Enochian, oh, this is all Kabbalistic, and we can break it down this and this and this.
Mhm.
Okay, so our oh, so we've got the quadrants, okay, which are elemental. Okay, I agree that the quadrants of the watchtowers are elemental. Oh, but we have 16 subangles, and our reference for that is the treatise on angel magic from 1700, which related the quadrants to the signs of geomancy. So we can bring geomancy in. So now we're going to attribute it like geomancy and build this huge thing called the Concourse of the Forces. We're going to do our Enochian gematria, not from Hebrew transliteration or anything like that, but from, well, 16 letters we can attribute to the signs of geomancy. We're not sure to do what to do with the other letters. And so then we could say, oh, look, in the Calvary cross, there's 10 squares. Obviously, that's the 10 Sephirot, so we're going to attribute them that way. And I mean, you could go through, and it's all logical.
Sure,
what they're
of
doing
course.
is completely logical.
Yeah.
But it is very much a synthetic, Victorian magical system that now Enochian has been added to this. And there's also issues like the Golden Dawn built their version of the Great Table, but they call it the tablets. That's the same thing. They break the table up into 4 pieces so they can move them around directions when the directions are primary, not the elements. That's like another thing to argue about. But there's 2 versions of the Great Table. And so there's the original version that D. and Kelly first received. And then there's a 1587 version called the Tabula Recensa. And this is a matter of contention between Enochian magicians. I follow Tabula Recensa myself because it was the final version of the table that D. and Kelly got. Okay. Some people don't follow the Tabula Recensa because the original form of it was obtained apparently by Kelly scrying on his own without D present. And some people think that's a huge problem. Although Kelly brought the table, D took it, they called up the spirits confirmed a bunch of stuff on it. And they spent, and D was finally like, okay, well, talking to these spirits, okay, I'm convinced that this is the final version. And I mean, I guess, there's the whole thing of, oh, did Kelly like hoodwink D on whatever? It's like, well, if you're going to argue that this whole thing was like a Edward Kelly con job, you could say the exact same thing about the first version of the table as well. And sure. I just think that's silly. I think if you look at how intricate the Enochian system is and how much stuff is there and how consistent it is back and forth, it seems impossible to me that somebody just making it up on the fly could get that level of consistency.
Oh, right, because linguists have looked at it, right? I mean, we know this, it's a case study in anthropological linguistics to look at it, and it's definitely a coherent language.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that, so the one hypothesis that I have seen floated, okay, and I don't believe this. So I brought this up years and years ago once on the alt magic group on Usenet. I think probably 25 years ago, and people thought I was advocating for it, which I was not. I am not. But really, and I don't believe this, but really the only way that it would even be possible, okay, for Kelly to have fabricated the and related to D the way he did, is if he had some other text that he was working off of and was memorizing pieces of or something like that. And nothing like that has ever been found anywhere. The stuff in the Enochian system, it seems to be, mostly unique. The only overlap, I think it's 60 some of the parts of the earth are referenced in Agrippa because they come out of Ptolemy's geography. And the spirits were clear, okay, in Ptolemy, and so God opened the world up unto Ptolemy, who classified the world thus. So the angels were clearly alluding to this. And then there's other parts of the earth that aren't listed there at all. So we don't know where those come from. I mean, we really don't, there really isn't, you see influences. Like if you look at how is the holy table different than the great table? Some people make that mistake. The holy table is the thing you actually do the work on. Some people look at that and say, well, okay, so the design is kind of similar to the Almadel. It is, okay. The Almadel, it's a square, it has a hexagram, but you do the Almadel, it's a wax thing. It's like about this big, and you put candles through it. And so what Dee did, and so he's got a wood table with a design kind of like the Almadel, bunch of angelic letters. The angelic letters we don't see from anywhere. And then he has a wax sigillum, which is the line drawing is from Liber Geratus, but the names are all filled in differently, and that's wax, and then stuff sits on top of that. So there are influences. Dee was using some similar technologies that you see in other grimoires, but the synthesis of Enochian is itself pretty unique. You really see influences. You really don't see direct copying from anything.
So Scott, I'm going to stop you there for just a second, because these are very advanced discussions of Enochian, and some people to be new to this. So how would you, like, in a very simple and straightforward way, define Enochian magic?
I would define it as a magical system that is derived from the work of Dee and Kelly. That's what I would call, pure classical Enochian. So, like, if you read Aaron Leach, he coined this terminology. He's talking about, de-purists and neo-Enochians. So neo-Enochian, that's like reconstructed systems, like the Golden Dawn, where they bring in a bunch of other elements. Crowley's system in Liber Hanok is largely a rehash of the Golden Dawn, though Crowley has a bunch of original stuff too from the Vision of the Voice that's important in Thelema. And or like the Aurum Solis system, that's another one where it's they're taking the diaries and they're adapting them in certain ways and adding certain things to them.
And it's angelic magic, correct?
Mostly. There are cacodemons in the watchtowers,
right,
which I have conjured, which are very workable for certain things and not as workable for others.
Your second book.
Yes. So then Mastering the Great Table that's based on like the quadrants of the watchtowers. Based on my interpretation of them, if you look at them, these are attributed like completely differently from the Golden Dawn. Yes, they are. They're based on my interpretation of how I think it fits together based on my reading of the diaries. And I include some stuff in there that, references that and talks about, okay, where this comes from, why I think it's this way and so forth. But one of the things that I do, we were talking about the Heptarchia, is this guy here, Mastering Mystical Heptarchy, that is book one of the series. I start people off on the Heptarchia Mystica. And that's different than, that like the Golden Dawn, so even like Liber Hanok, I think in Crowley stuff, it talks about it, but really there isn't much as far as working with them at all. It's like Crowley stuff gets more into, summarizing this book called The Concourse of the Forces, which is the thing that Golden Dawn put together with all of those attributions I was talking about earlier. And they're primarily related to the watchtowers, and then, to some degree, the heirs or aethers, which Crowley actually did his personal work with the heirs or aethers. But now I start off with the Heptarchia because it makes a lot more sense in the context of other grimoire magic that you might have done. Okay. And one of the most common symbol sets you'll see all over the place, in the Heptameron, in the Arbitel, in these other grimoires, is having spirits that are related to the 7 ancient planets. And this is like super common throughout the grimoire world. Anybody who's done, any kind of grimoire magic is probably familiar with it. And basically the Heptarchia Mystica. The Heptarchia Mystica is essentially the Enochian system of planetary magic. So the spirits you work with, you have a king and a prince for each of the 7 days of the week.
Mhm.
And then you have a king and prince who rule over the system as a whole.
Mhm.
So you basically have a total of 16 spirits that you're conjuring up.
Mhm.
The way it's worded, I mean, the king and the prince also have ministers, which are like subordinate spirits that do things, but you don't need to contact the ministers individually.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so what you do is, generally speaking, it's like you call the king, and then the prince will come with the king. And you call the king primarily for stuff related to like knowledge and understanding things, and the prince tends to be more for like doing stuff. That doesn't always hold though, if you look through the thing, but it's kind of a rule of thumb. The other thing that I like to mention is there's this great story of, okay, how powerful is Enochian and how powerful is the Heptarchia Mystica? Some people are like, oh, it's kind of inaccessible. I have trouble working with Heptarchia or whatever. Okay. But the Heptarchia Mystica may very well have been the system of magic that completely shaped the modern world. And this is how. So in 1588, John Dee put together the Heptarchia Mystica grimoire. So people say, oh, John Dee didn't finish the Enochian system. That's true from the standpoint of the entire system. He didn't put together a bunch of attributions for the watchtowers. He did, though, take the Heptarchial material and assemble that into a grimoire called the Heptarchia Mystica. And this was put together in 1588. And the other thing that happened in 1588 was the largest Spanish Armada was launched on England.
Right.
Okay? And there's this fascinating thing. If you look through the conjuration, so Dee adds stuff into the conjurations of stuff he personally did. And for one of the spirits, and it's Bafafes, I believe it is, the Prince for Tuesday. Dee has this long conjuration where he's talking about how, oh, you were with me and you helped me and all this kind of stuff, which he doesn't have for any of the other spirits. Okay, and what are Bafafe's powers? Bafafe's powers are reducing enemy ships, winning naval battles, all this kind of stuff. And it really is interesting to think that, if John Dee was going to put together a grimoire, well, the Spanish Armada would be the thing he'd probably want to stop, right? And then this lines up in the text, too. Here's the spirit that he says, oh, I called on you and you helped me when I was in Extremis and all this kind of stuff. And your powers are, reducing enemy ships and winning naval battles. And it's like the Spanish Armada was hit by all this freak weather stuff. It's like, so they launched, and then they thought the seas were going to be calm, and then there was a storm, and they were like driven, into, they had to stop over at Calais, then they had to try to launch something again, and it's like, then when they tried to go back around the British Isles, they got repulsed by the British Navy, and then they had to get around the British Isles, and going around Ireland, they were hit by a hurricane. A North Atlantic hurricane. Those are extremely rare. What are the odds that would happen right when these ships were trying to get back to Spain? Okay.
So you have a whole nother book just on Enochian magic and the emergence of the modern world.
Well, right. And okay, so think what the modern world would be like if the Spanish Armada had won. I mean, we'd be speaking Spanish, over here probably. I mean, Spain would have controlled all of the New World.
Oh,
and so it's like, I mean, who knows what that would have even looked like? Would there have been, an American Revolution that was even similar to that?
Yeah,
I mean,
United States of Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the history would go off in a completely different direction. And so it's like, well, I don't know, seems like some pretty powerful magic to me. So, and, I have found that, the Heptarchials are, they're very powerful. They have their listed powers. You could also use them kind of roughly along the lines of the planetary powers that are in Liber 777. A lot of those are linked back to Agrippa as far as things associated with the planets and the number scales. And Agrippa was one of Dee's key sources. We do know that. So there's a lot of Agrippa stuff, or Agrippa-inspired stuff that's part of the Enochian system. But yeah, so I mean, so so what you're going to find with Heptarchia is, all right, so you could do this. You could do it with, just the prayers and conjurations, if you're going to be like a grimoire purist, right? So you can do all the prayers and conjurations and conjure the king and the prince according to the methodology. You need some temple furniture for it. So you need that table and that sigil of God that I talked about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question too. Since you're on it, you're talking about how to start doing some basic Enochian magic. What's it like to put together the tools to do it?
What I recommend people do, and I talk about this in the book, is just do makeshift tools if you can't like go out and buy thousands of dollars worth of stuff. You do not need to buy thousands of dollars worth of stuff to do this system. There's the basic ways that you can do things that are quote unquote shortcuts, but I started working with a relatively minimal setup. My original table I worked with, this little wood thing this big, and I drew the letters on with a wood burner and stuff like that. And it was really basic.
And Mastering the Mystical Heptarchia has instructions and diagrams for these things.
Yeah, I presented on heptarchial magic at the National OTO convention, the ritual that went, really well. And so here's what I used for my setup. Okay, so I'm traveling to Florida, right? I'm not going to bring my whole, wood table and wax sigillum. Oh, I bring a wax sigillum on an airplane. It's like way to get it destroyed, right?
A U-Haul.
So, and I'm not going to drive because it's too far. So what I did is I just took a diagram of the holy table with the ensigns of creation, which are these 7 talismans that are supposed to go around it. Talismans, Dee was originally told they should be purified tin, but he finally basically cajoled the angels into letting him draw them on the table. Oh, okay, fine, you can draw them on the table. After, oh, can't we draw them? Can we please draw them? I mean, you read through some of the diaries, like it's actually funny. It's like a decent, oh, come on, can't we do this? And they are like, no, don't do that. And every so often they give in, like on this one. And so it printed it out. It's like, I took it and I sent it to like FedEx Concourse, and I had it printed out and laminated. So it's a 2x2 foot thing. It's not 3 by 3 feet. It's 2 by 2. It's got the table layout. Okay. For my sigillum de Amath, I went ahead, I printed out a diagram of it, and I glued it onto a wooden disc from Michael's. The thing cost like, $5. Okay. Glue that on. Then you draw that. There's a cross on the back with agua. You can just draw that in Sharpie. That's fine. Set that down. Okay. Then I get my cloth, which is red or changeable red and green silk. I like changeable red and green silk. You can go to any fabric store. There's a type of silk. It's called Tabasco. It's a red with some green double weave. That's what I use for the cloth. Okay, so I have a cloth. I could fold up the cloth, put that in a suitcase or something like that. Roll up the table diagram into a tube. And then I got, for crystals, actually, I got a bunch of these little glass lozenges, again, from Michael's, not expensive. And so I got a whole bunch of them, though. And then I did this ritual beforehand to like link them all together magically and stuff. And then everybody who was at the ritual had their own little scrying stone or shoe stone that they could hold, while I was doing this. And so then, okay, so put out my printout, put my sigillum de Amath on the printout, put the cloth over the top, put the crystal in the middle of the sigillum de Amath, you're golden.
That's awesome.
Thing from Kinko's, that costs like $60.
So really no need to go to the British Museum and copy everything the way it's on display.
No. And the other thing is that you have the lamen and the robe and the ring. Okay, so the ring, I did actually have a gold-plated ring that I use, but that's small enough and it's in a box. I can bring it places without destroying it. And the lamen, you can make that again just out of like tagboard or paper, just hang it around your neck. It's really not a thing where you need to go out and just, outfit your temple and just all this stuff to do it.
Right. The ring is probably one of the trickier things to deal with.
Yeah, but okay, there are substitutions you could do for the ring. So you can get silver rings that are not super expensive. I have a story in my book about silver rings. They tend to break in similar ways, and I don't know why that is.
Right. And you're not the one who's told that story.
They work though. I was able to get contact with spirits and stuff like that. I think, if you're very careful with the ring, and you might be able to actually use it for a longer period of time than I did. I used to wear mine like almost all the time, and perhaps some of it is just wear and tear from wearing it all the time too. My gold one I do not wear all the time. I mean, I mentioned, I wear my ring all the time. I had a brass one that I used to wear all the time. But in brass, I find brass doesn't seem to break the same way. But brass is really hard to find, and I don't know why that is. You go out to places like some of these places that do magical jewelry and stuff. Oh, you get silver rings pretty easily, but like brass is really hard to find for some reason.
It's interesting. The ancient sort of imitation gold, orichalcum, is probably something very similar to brass, and so that's kind of neat.
Well, probably, and it seems like it works very well without breaking. Even if the ring is brass, that's okay.
Yeah.
It seems like that's not a big problem. Now, as your temple gets nicer, it seems like your communication gets a little cleaner and clearer. But, as long as you can get in touch with the spirits and send them out to do stuff, they're as powerful as they are powerful. So it's not a case where, if your temple is, some simple thing, you don't get a powerful manifestation. It doesn't really work that way. You do get better communication. And it's a little bit clearer to do in your mind or whatever, and some people have reported that that the scrying experience is better. I do a lot of practical Enochian, so I don't actually, and I'm not very good at visual scrying. So what I'll tend to do is I'll do like the spirit vision kind of thing where you like project your mind into the space where the spirit is and interact with it that way when I work. Instead of like doing it like with a specific mirror. With my eyes open for whatever reason, that doesn't really click. Unless I do something like we used Nova Pro Brain Machine, this binaural light and sound thing. If I do that on an alpha theta program for about 10 minutes, then I can scry with my eyes open. But it's like the resulting information is no better or worse than what I get from just that active imagination technique, as long as you're checking your data with the spirits. You get like words of power, numbers and stuff that you can verify with gematria and things like that.
So you're telling us like working with Enochian equipment, a little bit like being a stereo buff. You
yeah,
receiver that works and some speakers, and you can upgrade and make it better.
Yeah, and for all I know, you plug it into a radionic thing, and I don't know, man. Some of those guys are like real stereo buffs. It's like, I think a stereo guy built this radionic machine. But yeah, no. So that is not a bad analogy at all. And in terms of actually getting stuff done, practical magical work, it's not as important to have everything be of the exact, material and stuff like that.
Can you give a few examples of some good things to utilize Enochian magic for?
Well, like I was talking about, so with the heptarchy, okay, anything you'd use planetary magic for, you can use the corresponding heptarchial king and prince.
That makes great sense.
So and so they have their powers are enumerated in the grimoire. I've also found though that like if you conjure up, for example, the king and prince for Thursday, okay, to like get you a job or something like that, like Jupiter. Okay? It works a lot like a Jupiter operation, but like if you would use like the Agrippa spirit intelligence system, that type of thing. There's commonalities. Probably there's some influence. I mean, you have the king and the prince, and also if you look at the intelligence of the spirit, the intelligence is kind of for knowing, and the spirit is kind of for doing. There's also this kind of negative connotation that Agrippa says, the spirit is for bad. But one of the things that he's trying to do too is he's trying to draw this distinction between what he called natural magic, which is more like science, and like summoning spirits for practical things, which he thought was like thaumaturgy and like getting toward, black magic kind of stuff. Because in the 3 books, Agrippa, he's really trying to kind of rehabilitate the image of magic into kind of the Hermetic framework.
Right. The things that would have made
yeah,
his
so really
magic,
anything you can use.
would have made his magic palatable
Mhm.
to the audience at the time, right? No matter what he actually practiced in private.
Well, yeah, and I'm willing to bet, he practiced in private something like the
Right.
planetary magic system, because it's like all that, like the Kamiya sigil derivation. I haven't seen that in any earlier sources, for example. And I mean, that's like a generalized way to build spirit sigils. That's a super innovation. Prior to that, your spirit catalogs had all these like hand-drawn things for sigils and stuff like that. Whereas a grip says, well, here's the Kamiya of this planet, and you draw it on the letters like that. It's like, okay, now you have a general system. And so you get to the Golden Dawn, you see like the Rose Cross sigil creator, like in Victorian England. But it's like prior to that, it's the Kamiya thing. That was like the first general system I think we had in Western magic for its spirit sigils, and it works great.
So when you so you've given us a lot of great background to the Heptarchia. What about the kinds of magic that you can do with the Great Table?
All right, so the Great Table it's basically the elemental system of the Enochian universe. And so if you conjure up like an elemental king, they could do the same kinds of things that like, Levi's elemental kings could do, that sort of a deal. And so it's like, all right, well, if you want to do, fire operation, okay, you conjure the king of fire now. And that is one of the places, by the way, where this book, let me just show you. This guy here, holding it up on the thing. I have people say, hey, where could I get your books? And I'm like, okay, why are you asking me when you could type them into Google? So type them into Google, you can get them Amazon, anywhere, right? So the Great Table is actually kind of an interesting example of where I personally, working off the diaries, diverge quite a bit from how the Golden Dawn laid things out. Like I attribute different kings to the elements, for example, from the Golden Dawn, based on the Tabula Recensa, which is the final version of the table, which has some of the stuff moved around, and then based on my reading of some of the schemas in the diaries themselves, rather than trying to map it into some pre-existing thing like the Golden Dawn directional schema, which they did. And the elements and the planets, okay, are they're consistent, complete systems on their own. So this actually comes out of Crowley. He talks about how, well, the system of the elements is a complete system, and the system of the planets is a complete system. And so you can actually do anything with the elements you could do with the planets. You just have to, sort them out correctly. And, the zodiac is the other big symbol set. The zodiac is complete in itself too. So, for example, so you can go down the list. If you like protection and cursing, you use fire. For relationships, stuff like that, you use water. Healing and knowledge is air. And then like practical material success is earth. So, I mean, you could just essentially break it down that way. But then, okay, you can get more into it when you're getting into the subquadrants. The subquadrants, they have specific powers that are not necessarily laid out in an orderly fashion. So this Golden Dawn thing of, we'll say, so this is the fire tablet, and then this up here is like fire of fire, and then this is air of fire, water of fire. And none of that is actually from the diaries. It's from the 1700 treatise on angel magic that tried to link it into geomancy. And this is the same source where you're going to find ensigns of creation that have goetic demon names on them. The goetic demons do not go on the ensigns of creation. But according to Thomas Rudd in 1700 in the treatise on angel magic, he was trying to build this comprehensive system, bringing together all the different grimoires, I think was his idea. So actually, if you look at the subquadrants are related to particular powers. So, for example, there is a subquadrant on the Great Table. There are the angels of medicine. Okay, real basic. You call them up for healing. Okay. And also, their counterpart, there are cacodemons that have the same dominion over medical things, but you use them for causing diseases instead of curing them. Okay.
And is this a story about 2020?
Well, I don't know, man. If somebody, did some cacodemon operation, or I have no idea.
A cacodemon.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, they think we've been due for another pandemic. They say they hit about every 100 years. I mean, the last one was about 100 years ago. But so I don't know that it's that statistically significant that it happened when it did. Although, I think the response was catastrophically bad, but that's absolutely. Like another thing.
Right.
So really that would be more like, I don't know, the cacodemons of, stupid politics or something. we don't have that in the system. But okay, so I suppose if you're using, so the seniors, okay, who serve the kings and seniors, they rule knowledge and judgment in human affairs, according to D. So, I mean, technically, if we're talking sphere of influence, you conjure them to cause bad knowledge and judgment in human affairs. I mean, they don't have corresponding cacodemons, but like the planets, it's like, well, so like, can you cast a curse on somebody with Jupiter? Well, you can, if you want to expand, some aspect of their life that they don't want.
Right.
I knew somebody who cast a curse on somebody using Jupiter to make them gain weight, and it worked. So, I mean, and like calling on like the positive spirits of Jupiter. It's sphere of influence, though. So it's like, political and other ascendancy. So you could raise people up politically, or you can conjure the spirits of Jupiter to bring them down.
It seems like the cacodemons have been having their way with us for a while.
Yeah, there are others. There are other cacodemons too. So it's like, for some of these powers of the Great Table, there's the angels of it, and then the cacodemons of it, and so that it depends on what you call in terms of what you're trying to do.
Scott, we're gonna wrap up before too long. This has been great. You make the job of an interviewer so easy.
Well, I hope so.
So much to share. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about. I think there is a forthcoming third book?
There is a third book. I don't have an official publication date. It has taken far longer to get it out and put together than I expected. But the third book is called Mastering the 30 Airs, and it deals with the airs or aethers. And so in the Enochian systems, you have the planetary system, which is the Heptarchia. You have the elemental system, which is the Great Table, and you have this basically zodiacal system that is the 30 airs. And so in the original D material, what this was supposed to do was you were supposed to use the aethers or airs for socio-political work. So you got the 91 parts of the earth, and you could open a part of the earth, and then you could like conjure into that part of the earth what you wanted to have happen. And it was supposed to be able to influence rulers and princes and stuff like that. Okay. So that's kind of an interesting point. And it's not really addressed in most of the books that are published on Enochian. Most of them are like, oh, well, the ether is there for scrying, or, well, okay, so that's what Crowley did. And in the Vision of the Voice, okay, Crowley, he has this method for, scrying the ether, rising on the planes, however you want to talk about it, which is fairly simple. It's like, you do a basic ritual procedure, and then, you do the call or key that's related to the air, and then you just, scry what happens. And that's how Crowley wrote the Vision and the Voice. And the Vision and the Voice is probably, I think, completely my opinion, not doctrinal or anything, but I am of the opinion that the Vision and the Voice is probably the next most important text in Thelema after the Book of the Law, because many of the ideas that make it into the Thelemic system come out of Crowley's experiences with the aethers. And so that's where Enochian and Thelema, I think, kind of intersect. So I talk about it a little bit in the new book, but primarily I'm focused on this grimoire-like method of, well, how do you open parts of the earth? What are the parts of the earth? I've adapted the parts of the earth to match the tabula recensa. I don't know that anybody has published those versions. The names are a little bit different. They're more similar to what's in the Aurum Solus than what's in the Golden Dawn. Somebody was pointing out that a couple of the name changes that are in the Aurum Solus Mysterium Magica are the same as what I came up with when I regenerated the table. So perhaps the Aurum Solus published the names before. but I have it laid out in a comprehensive thing where each part is and stuff like that, and how you work with it to, to open up these parts of the earth and actually do magic. I'm talking about doing zodiacal magic using the 12, zodiacal kings that are associated with the aethers and so forth. So that's all going to be in the new book.
That's going to be fantastic. And we will put links to your existing books on the Facebook page and the new book when it's available. And
oh, absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
We'll get to talk again when that comes out. And speaking of the intersection of Enochian and Thelema, one of the really important figures in Thelema is Babylon. Can you talk a little bit about Babylon and Enochian and how it's carried over into?
Okay, I'll talk about it, but
okay.
One of the things I will say that maybe you won't have Thelemites necessarily tell you this, but actually, if you look at it from the standpoint of certainly some of the D diaries, there's hardly anything. Okay. There's this one communication that's called the Daughter of Fortitude that we do during the Office of the Readings. That did come out of the D material. And many modern practitioners think that that was a communication from an entity that is similar to the Thelemic Babylon. Certainly the characterization of like what the statements are and so on seem like it makes sense. There's also some commonality to a couple of sections of the Gnostic text, the Thunder Perfect Mind. If you put them side by side, it's kind of interesting to compare those. And the Thunder Perfect Mind, well, that was supposed to be an utterance of the Gnostic goddess Sophia, is what most scholars think. So, and is Babylon Sophia? I don't really know. There are differences. There are substantial differences in terms of, looking at, but there may be some etymology there that connects the two in some way. So basically, Babylon in Thelema comes from, I think, there are, 2 or 3 references total in the Vision and the Voice. Okay. And so where the commonality comes in is that Crowley wrote that, so the Vision and the Voice, that represents his initiation as a master of the temple in 8 = 3. And so in Thelema, this idea of, draining the blood into the cup of Babylon to cross the abyss, become a master of the temple, and that sort of thing is all associated. But really, and one of the things that they'll look at is there's a word in Enochian, Babylon, which is translated as of a harlot. And some people say, hey, that's what, well, I don't know actually, because if you're really going to look at that, okay, you've got to look at, first of all, in the book of Revelation. So they both, I think, obviously come from the book of Revelation as a source. You see a respelling of Babylon and Thelema. But, it's Babylon the Great has fallen, and then there's the woman clothed in the sun and crowned with the stars, and that's not necessarily Babylon the Great. Babylon is a place in the book of Revelation. And so, you put the two together, and it's like, well, you're doing some like dispensationalist kind of stuff. So I don't, and one of the things I did observe, though, that I thought was interesting, and I'll just wrap this up here is, so if you treat the letters of the ring, it's Pele and then like a V and an L and then this other thing. I'm not sure that it's actually a V and an L. I think it might be a 60-degree angle and a 90-degree angle. That's another discussion.
Sure.
But if you're looking at the letters and just treat them as letters, you translate them to Hebrew along the lines that Crowley normally transliterated to Hebrew, you do get the number 156, which is the number of Babylon and Thelema. So that's kind of an interesting geometric thing that perhaps indicates a connection there. But yeah, I mean, I would basically say that everything that's Babylon and Thelema, if you just take a look at the Vision and the Voice, you can read every snippet that involves Babylon. Just do search for Babylon in the text if you can find it someplace. And there really aren't that many references. But I mean, Babylon does show up there though. So I mean, there's a connection, but what that connection is, I think, is kind of hard to say. And how authentic that connection is to how Dee and Kelly envisioned the system is also a question. And maybe that's okay, because we are talking about like a turning of the aeon kind of system in Thelema, and maybe it wasn't significant before, but is significant now. Maybe the daughter of 42 is like a harbinger of like the age to come or something like that. There's various ways you can read it.
Mm-hmm. Scott, thank you so much for that. And I knew you were going to be a great person to have a discussion with, and you were also going to be just the right person to ask about that intersection between Thelema and Enochian. I just want to thank you once again, and we'll have links up on the Facebook page. And please let us know what you're doing and continue to share your different projects and endeavors, and we'll stay in touch.
Oh, absolutely. I'll come back anytime. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Always
Thanks.
happy to sit for an interview.
Thanks again, Scott.
Oh, thank you, Dave.